We're Osteotouch. We developed and patented a new technology to simplify and make easier a great number of everyday procedures. We found a solution to many issues that you may have to deal with every day in your practice. For example, to regain volumes on a very important reabsorption, that might save a GBR or at least to put you in a better spot before doing it. Or expanding in a controlled and progressive manner a very thin bridge. Well, that without using your own manual force. Or mobilizing even the most difficult roots. That leaving untouched both the soft and the hard tissues. Again, no muscle strength involved at all. Or how about treating the vast majority of sinus cases always with a crestal approach? Even when the bone available is very limited. And osteodensification at its best, whenever the bone quality you're dealing with is too soft. But we don't use reverse drilling, it's a different way. Condensing the bone and in the meantime modifying and correcting the axis of the osteotomy you're doing with no drilling, no heat. It is amazing what the technology took us nowadays. Well, I've got only 10 minutes, but how about removing crowns and ridges with up to 1,000 pounds of perfectly longitudinal forces? That would make everyone's life easier. Or tax insertion and membrane fixations, you know, those difficult lingual tags to place, now it's easy. And I could go on and on with many more functionalities of our devices and many more issues that our technology solves. All this, one unit and one handpiece, 50 millionths of a second of time of impact, up to 500 kilos of force delivered, with a 5000 G of acceleration. That is our patent. We use magnetism to operate commonly known and used surgical instruments in order to dramatically increase the efficacy of the instruments and the compliance of the patient. You see your precision increasing in manipulating the bone and doing a great number of everyday procedures. And a few more things that you might find very interesting. All that at zero bone removal. We don't drill, we shape the bone, so everything stays there. Zero heat, overheating, necrosis, all of that bypassed completely by our technology. Just like that. No heat means no water needed. You know, when you're working on those posteriors, you're making a sinus elevation, field of view clear. By the way, we just published a research comparing what happens to the bone and why when you're drilling it or when you're using our technology. It is now one of the 4 most downloaded publications in the Scientific Journal of Materials. It is a game changer in implantology.
So let's see some clinical application of this device with the different use of tips. First of all, extraction. In fact, as we can see in this video, when we want to extract a molar, usually we have to start with the fibrectomy, periotomy. So the first tip of the mallet can be used to perform this periotomy. The difference is that the tip starts also to expand the bone. So we can go on with the second tip. With the second tip, we can also use, like we can see in the video, like a luxator. So we can have both the effect, the bone expansion and the luxation of the tooth. So only at the end, when the tooth has enough mobility, we can use the forceps to remove the tooth. In this way, we are really reducing the stress on the bone during the extraction, and we are avoiding the fracture of the tooth during the extraction. You can think about teeth with root canal treatment in a sample. So let's see this animation. This animation shows how it works. When we have a root, you can see the animation on the left. When we have a root, or in case of ankylosis, we want to cut working in the interface between the bone and the root. So starting with the first tip, we can cut the periodontal ligament and we can start expanding the ridge. And thanks, due to the expansion of the ridge, we reduce the friction, we increase the mobility, and it's possible that we have the effect of the extrusion of the root. So at the end, we use the forceps, but the tooth is very easy to remove because we have cut and expanded, cut the periodontal ligament and expanded all the bone. In these cases, if we use the forceps, very often we can have the fracture of the crown, and then the extraction is more difficult. So before using the forceps, if we use magnetic mallet, we can expand the ridge, we can cut the periodontal ligament, and then the extraction became very, very easy. As you can see in the image, the tooth is completely safe. Look the heat in the interface between the bone and the root. So you have this mobilization of the tooth, and then it became very easy, saving 100% of the bone. This is the kit. We have 10 tips, 5 straight and 5 curved with the same shapes. So you can choose, if you are in frontal area, you can choose the straight one. If you are in the posterior area, you can choose to use the curved one. Let's see again the animation. So tip enter inside the ridge. We have the expansion of the ridge, and we have the separation between the root and the periodontal ligament. This combined effect simplify a lot our extraction, but save really a lot of bone because we don't need burr to complete our extraction bars. Okay, let's see this case of wisdom teeth. In case of wisdom teeth, one of the problems is visibility. So look at this image. We have a decayed wisdom tooth, and we had to remove the roots. So it's better to have a good visibility, to expose the root, and then without covering with our head on instrument, our view, we can use this tip. This is the first tip, extraction 1. This tip is very thin, so can enter into the periodontal space and can separate the root to the bone. After the use of this tip, we can change it to the second one. With the second tip, we can go on with extraction. This is the second tip.
Which tip is the second tip?
Tip
What's the number on
wider, is stronger, so we can use it like a luxator, as you can see in the video. If we need, we can activate the mallet to find the space between the root and the bone. And voila, the tooth is out of the mouth. We can see how many bone we have saved without the using of burrs. And this is the image of the root. Look at this detail. We have 2 roots, and in the middle of the roots there is the bone. This bone was cut by the use of the first tip, the extraction 1. Let's see another video. This is a very easy extraction, but we had a very thin buccal bone. We don't want to lose this buccal bone. So it's important to make a very gentle, to perform a very gentle extraction. And using this device, we can separate the root from the bone. So I'm walking around the root using the first tip, the thinnest. After I completed the separation, using the tip, this is the extraction number 3. With this tip, I can make the luxation and complete the extraction. Very, very easy and fast and safe. Okay. In case we have multiple roots, we need to separate the roots. But after the separation, after the rhizotomy, we can perform 3 single extraction like before. But you can see after the extraction how it's possible to maintain the septum in the middle of the roots. And this septum is good for an immediate implant insertion. And of course, to perform this implant insertion, we use the mallet. So with the same device, we start from the extraction and we go on with the implant preparation. So let's see this side preparation. When we have enough bone, but we don't want to remove the bone, we want to save it, and a big advantage of the use of mallet is that we can prepare the site, pushing the bone, and like in this case, we can recontour the ridge. This is a case, a courtesy by Dr. Luigi Cannullo. He saved, he has made the extraction and preserved the ridge with bone graft. But as you can see from the image on the left, we had a contraction of the volume. The buccal bone has a resorption, so we have not enough volume. He prepared flapless, only using the magnetic mallet and insert an implant. As you can see by the picture, after the healing, we have a complete recontour of the, a complete recontour of the volume without bone graft, without using of other kind of graft, like soft tissue graft. Let's see this video by Dr. Luca Boschini. This is a video about the implant site preparation only with the osteotomes. So we elevate the flap. Then we start with the first tip. And with this first tip, this is the 100p, we can reach the final length. In this moment, we are also finding the good direction for our implant, because the same direction is the same as the tip. So after the first tip, the first osteotome, we go on with the second one. This is 160. We have a good visibility, no water. And during this site preparation, you can see the bone expansion, how the bone is moved buccally, increasing the volume. This is 160, 230. The third tip. Look the bone buccally, how is moving, how is it going to expand. Another tip. In this, with this preparation, we have of course the bone condensation. So we increase a lot the primary stability of our implant. We if we want, we can load this implant, because with this site preparation, we have osteocondensation, and our implant reach very high stability. This is very important when we want to make full arch, immediate loading of full mouth rehabilitation. Look the range, and look the bone expanded buccally. The healing screw, and then the suture. Look this case. In this case, we had a very thin ridge, so a GBR probably was needed, but using this device was possible to obtain a bone shaping, a bone remodeling, a bone expansion, starting from that situation and finishing with this situation. So it was possible to insert an implant into full natural bone.
Hi everyone, let me introduce you to Black Ruby. This is the most recent evolution in osteotomes geometry conceived to optimize bone modeling 100% drill-free. I designed these instruments to overcome common issues we all experience when using traditional osteotomes to expand and condense ridges that present different densities. These difficulties are typically due to the conical shape of commonly used osteotomes and their flat apex. I love to use the magnetic mallet and figured that I could maximize its potential by changing the shape of the osteotomes. Let me show you how. Black Ruby is characterized by a double conicity of their apex. The top part is more conical, while the lower becomes more cylindrical. This allows you to prepare the implant site similarly to the most common implant geometries. Moreover, the convex tip of the instrument reduces the impact surface with the bone, increasing its capacity to penetrate. The third feature is the DLC coating of the instrument. This is a special coating that reduces the friction to the bone almost down to zero. It is the same friction factor as Ruby, hence we call them Black Ruby. The complete series comprises 5 osteotomes available in both the straight version for the anterior and in the curved version to operate in the posterior sectors. Laser-marked lengths on the tip make it easy to see how deep we are inside the bone when doing the osteotomy. Let's see how they perform. This is a post-extraction case with an implant site prepared in the septum. Magnetic Mallet allows you to execute the extraction by saving 100% of the septum, making available that bone to prepare the site. I started with Black Ruby 1, which had a sharp tip. The bone gets expanded and condensed while I set the axis of the osteotomy. With Black Ruby 2, I continue to prepare the implant site, increasing the diameter and saving 100% of the bone tissue. Then I used Black Ruby 3 to prepare at full length. This is when the extremely well-performing Black Ruby shines with its warm knife-through-butter effect. Osteotomes number 4 and 5 finalize the coronal preparation of the implant site. Afterward, I place the implant in this perfectly prepared site with 100% of native bone available. You'll be amazed by the torque obtained, even in a post-extractive site. This is the post-op X-ray, where we can appreciate the increased bone density around the implant.
Sinus lift is one of the most useful procedures when we use a magnetic mallet. Let's see this case. This is a normal case. Every day we can have this kind of case in our clinical practice. We have a healed ridge. We have a little contraction of the volume. But when we make the CBCT scan, we can find a good width, but not a good height. In fact, we have only in the lower part, we have 6.8 millimeters. So in this case, we can use the osteotomes to perform the old summer technique. With the summer technique, we can break a piece of bone using the mallet, and we can push up the Schneider membrane and then insert the implant. Let's see, this is the X-ray after the implant insertion. We can see the piece of bone pushed up by the implant. This is the healing, and after the healing, we can see after 3 months and after 3 years. After 3 years, we can see a complete new bone around the apex of our implant. So this is daily practice. We can also perform sinus lift with an immediate implant. So this is a typical case. We have to remove these roots, and in the middle, the septum site, we have a lower 8 for to insert a longer implant. So we can perform the extraction, we can push up the sinus with the mallet, and we can insert the implant. After 3 months, you can see the healing with the new sinus floor healed around my implant. And this is a check after, I think, 1 year. So you can see the new floor shaped around the implant without graft. Is your fault. You can use the graft if you want to see more bone inside the sinus. You can use the graft to elevate bigger area of the sinus, but for me this is enough. Let's see this other case. In this case, look the images up on the right. We have no bone, 0 bone. If we want to insert an immediate implant, is impossible because we have infection, we have the sinus, we have, but we have complete bone in the palatal and the vestibular area. So we can box this defect, we can break the sinus, and we can insert an implant. Look the video and let's see together where we can insert the implant. I can insert the implant in the septum, but it's very, very thin bone. So I need not to drill this bone. I need to push this bone into the sinus. So this is the post-op X-ray. I insert some biomaterial inside the defect, and let's see after 9 months. This is the healing. So my implant made the space for the clot, and this clot became bone. But if we check 3D scan, is very impressive how many bone we obtained inserting the immediate implant, because we obtain a lot of clot stability and the biomaterial made the rest. Okay, this is another technique that I really love, is the sinus lift with LMSF, local management of the sinus floor. This approach allows us to push the bone when we want to insert an implant, and we have a case like this. This was a case, this image is a post-operative image. You can see which was the sinus before the implant insertion. In this webinar, I am showing very fast several cases, only to understand which is the flexibility of the use of this device. I had this sinus. In this case, you enter not straight, you enter with a different direction, in this case from distally to mesially, and we can push the bone, we can make a fracture of the sinus floor, and we insert the implant. So after 3 months, we can see, I go back, after 3 months, look around the apex, we can see new bone, and after 4 months, you can see a new floor of the sinus with a good healing. This surgery was performed into a very old man, 82 years old. He wanted to chewing with a molar. So I made this surgery flapless, without elevate a flap. So if we compare this kind of surgery to a sinus lift, it's completely different. It's flapless. After 4 months, my patient had his crown. After 6 months, the healing is amazing. Okay, we can mix several approaches. We can make the sinus lift with LMSF, and if we need, we can add a GBR. Look this case. In this case, we had to restore a bridge. In the first implant, we have the sinus very close to the apex of the implant. So if you want to put a longer implant, we can make a fracture of the sinus floor, and moving the bone away, we can insert a longer implant. In the posterior area, in the molar zone, we can see how width is the ridge, but we need a wider implant. But if we want to insert a longer implant, we have to perform a sinus lift. With the mallet, we don't have to think about this. We only have to prepare the site using our osteotomes, and then we insert the implant. Instead of the first premolar, you can see on the right, we don't have enough buccal bone. So in this case, we use the mallet to insert the implant, to make the fracture of the bone, and then we add some biomaterials with a GBR with mesh. Look the picture, the extraction were made by the magnetic mallet, of course. You can see how thin was the cortical bone. Then I insert the implant, and I choose to increase the vestibular bone with the biomaterials and a mesh. Everything is performed flapless, a little flap, but I exposed only the crestal part of the bone. Some PRF, healing screw, and sutures. So very, very small surgery. You can see in this image the fracture of the bone in the first molar. In the second, in the first premolar, sorry. In the second molar, I moved the bone more distally. I had the fracture of the sinus to reach a good stability in the cortical sinus floor. This is the healing. Look here, the fracture on the first implant and the healing. The healing is complete. You can see a new sinus wall around my implant. Another case. This case, we had a different target. My patient was very scared, and she wanted to restore this bridge, 5 teeth bridge, in one single procedures with immediate load. Looking at this X-ray, we can see a lot of weight of bone, but if we go on, she was very, very scared and wanted a fixed immediate restoration. So this is the bridge, the fracture of the roots. So we had to remove the roots, and the bone seems to be high. But when we move from the 2D into the 3D, we have a big surprise. The surprise is the bone is very thin bridge, poor quality of bone. This is a D4, and we have in the first tooth on the right, you can see 0 buccal bone, very, very thin buccal bone. In the last molar, we have to perform a sinus lift, and in the middle implant, the ridge was very, very thin, and we have in a couple of millimeters, we have the sinus. So in the middle ridge, I needed to perform a split crest plus a sinus lift. So let's see the surgery. I remove the bridge, I remove the root every time with mallet to save that thin buccal bone on the canine region. This is after the extraction. And let's plan the surgery for each implant. This is the first implant. If we want to make a screw with the implant and we want to screw on the implant connection without using multi-unit abutment, we can't have this kind of inclination. We have to change the inclination. With the mallet, it's very easy because we start in this way, but going on with the second and the third tip, we can change the inclination. In this way, we have also the bone compression, we have bone osteodensification, and we increase the stability of our implant. So then we can insert the implant, and this is after the surgery. You can see the implant in a good position, and we can see the abutment because I loaded this implant. This is the last implant in the molar area. We have D4. You can see how black is the bone in this area, and the 8 was only 7 millimeters. So we can start with the thinnest tip, the first tip. We can go with the wider one, and we can start to make a fracture of the sinus. So after the fracture, we can push the bone. If you want to insert biomaterial, you can use it. I don't like to use biomaterial in these cases, but using wider osteotomes, we are having a bone compression, a bone osteodensification. So after the last osteotome, we insert the implant, and we can see the post-operative X-rays. Look how the bone changed. Look the color. Now is more white. So we have pushed the bone, and we increased the stability of my implant. In fact, you can look, there is the abutment because I loaded this implant. The most difficult area was this, in the middle of the two implants. This ridge was thin, but also short. So I had to perform in the same time the split crest and then the sinus lift. So we start with the first tip, the split tip. After the use of the split tip, we use the cut, is the second one. With the cut, we can push the bone vestibulary. So I'm expanding the bone. After the expansion, we start with the osteotomes. So we use the first one, the second one, we have the elevation, we have the sinus floor elevation, pushing the bone up, and then we insert the implant. Let's see how amazing is the post-operative X-ray. This is the implant insertion. I didn't load this implant because with all these expansion and sinus floor elevation, here the stability was not enough for an immediate loading. These are some pictures during the surgery, the first implant and the last implant. I made also a connective tissue graft on the first implant for aesthetic reasons. And this is the graft, the CTG graft, CTZ graft. And the bridge, direct screwed bridge, immediate loading, loaded. Let's see on the right, the split crest. I didn't add the split crest only on site where I had to insert the implant. I splitted all the ridge. So I made a big change of all the profile of the ridge profile. These are all the section to see the implant insertion, implant for each implant. Look the piece of bone that I fractured and pushed inside the sinus, and the fracture is sustained by the tip of the implant. This is on the right, I recall with the perfect healing of all the implants. Osteodestruction to avoid sinus lift is LMS F, and we can use that approach I showed before also in these kind of cases. This case is fully loaded on the website and on the Osteotouch YouTube page, so you can see all the surgery. So I will skip the video, you will find the video there, but this is the situation. In this case, the patient wanted to save the first root, so I had to insert 2 implants here. In this case, if we want to insert 2 implants, of course we can perform a sinus lift. But if we don't want to use fake bone, biomaterials, we can approach in a different way. So we can make a sinus lift, but if we don't want to make a sinus lift, a nice approach is this. We can insert tilted implant. But I don't like tilted implant when we have teeth near the implant. Like in this case, we had the second molar behind the root of the first molar. Because in this case, we need to use multi-unit abutment. And when we screw the bridge on this multi-unit abutment, we can have some difficulties to manage the prosthodontic profiles. So my best choice in this case is using magnetic mallet. You can enter inside the natural bone, and then pushing the bone, we can insert a straight implant without using biomaterials. So changing the size of the osteotomes, we can also improve the prosthodontic position. So we can choose the best position, and then we can insert the implant. In this case, I performed also a crown lengthening. We can see the full video online. Which are the advantages of the use of this device? First of all, we increase the visibility. In fact, we don't need irrigation. We don't need water. And without water, we have a better visibility. And another advantage is the precision. In fact, with this device, the direction of the heat, the direction of our strength of the device is coaxial with the tips. Instead, comparing with the use of manual mallet and osteotomes or scalpel, we don't have good control of the direction of the strength. The control, in fact, we can use both our hand to control the position and the direction of the tip during the use of the magnetic mallet. And the movement is only 1 millimeter, so is really safe. You can imagine when we are under the sinus and we need to make the fracture of the sinus floor, with this control and with the excursion of the tips of only 1 millimeter, we are very safe. Other advantages is fast, because it's more powerful, so we can go faster, and we can jump some steps during some procedures. So we need really less time to make the same procedures comparing with the manual one. It's ergonomic because it's 2 instruments in one. So if we want, we can have one more hand to use other instrument for demarcation, in example. And the most important advantage for me, is the zero bone loss, because we cut the bone. We don't have to use the burr or other instrument that remove the bone. We are saving 100% of the bone. And this is very important in case of extraction, because when we remove a tooth, very often we have to replace the tooth. So we want to save all the bone is possible to save. And when we want to insert an implant, if we use burrs, we remove the bone. Instead, we can use osteotomes to prepare the implant site, saving and pushing away the bone and saving all the bone available at the moment. Another advantage is this comfort for the patient, because we don't have the water in the mouth. but also because we don't have case of clinical observation of a paroxysmal position vertigo. This vertigo appears when we use the manual mallet, fortunately not so often, but it's not nice for the patient to have vertigo after a surgery. And there is a study that shows how this complication is not observed. So let's see which are the tips. On this device, using different forces, we can have different tips. We have tips for extraction with different size and shape, starting from the number 1 to the number 2. The number 1 is very thin, and we can't use it like a luxator or elevator, but from the number 2 to the number 3 and the number 4, it's possible to use these tips also like luxator elevator. So we can activate the tip with a mallet, and then we can go on using them like manual luxator. This is the extraction number 5. We can also insert implant. So we can perform osteotomy. For this use, we have different tips, starting from the first tip, the number 100, 100P, and we can see on the tips there are some laser mark describing the wide at each length of the tip. It's very important to notice that the tips are conical. So before starting to insert an implant, we should check the size of our limb implant, and we should also check which is the diameter at that length, because every implant has a different shape. So going on, an example to the 160, we can see the diameter at 13 millimeters is 3.4. So it's better to check in advance which is the mark that we have to reach to prepare the bone enough to insert the implant. These tips are very conical, so I will show you the new tips. This is the 200, is one of my favorite tips because it's good enough to push the bone and is not too wide, so we can use this tip everywhere. You can see at the length of 13, the size is 3.8. So if we go on the next osteotomes, it becomes too wider. So the tip is 300, so only 3 millimeters of diameter on the beginning, but at the length of 13 is too wide. So it's important to check this length because it is possible to over prepare the hole to insert the implant. If, in example, we want to insert a wider implant, a 4.5, in this case, we should use the tip 300, but in a shorter length, only for 8 millimeters. In fact, at 8 millimeters, this tip reached the diameter of 4.2 millimeters. So it seems to be complicated, but my suggestion is only to check the different size of this osteotome for each length. These are the next tips for osteotomy, the 330 and the 360. The difference between these tips is also the shape of the top of the tip, because some instruments are flat, some instruments are curved. So they can be used for different applications. If you want to push the bone, or if you want to condense the bone, or if you want to, an example, to crack, to make a fracture of the sinus flow. Okay. These are the tips for the split crest. We can use these tips to cut the bone, and then using the osteotomes, we can expand the bone. So if we have a very thin ridge, we can use this tip to cut the bone to make an expansion, increasing the size of this these tips, and then we can go on preparing the site. This is the expander tree, and in the last year we have also new special tips. These are the Genoa A1, A3. These special tips are perfect if we have a cortical bone, and if we are not able to expand this bone, so we prefer to cut the bone, the cortical, with the special tip that has an Ike perform. The first, when we have to choose the right position of an implant, we can use this tip. This tip allows us to fix the point, and then we can go on with other instrument. But this point is very cylinder, so has a zero friction inside the bone, and is perfect to mark our implant position. Or these are other osteotomes called AZ. These osteotomes are curved and designed for the use in the mandibula, in the lower jaw.